Good evening. It is 6:34, and I would like to call this regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting to order. And we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I did not ask for any volunteers today, so I will lead the pledge. Thank you. Oh, we're not on. And apologies, we're starting late, and so I'm trying to skip ahead quickly here. We have a big agenda, but I do want to provide the land acknowledgement before we move on. The West Hollywood Planning Commission acknowledges that the land on which we gather, and that is currently known as the City of West Hollywood, is the occupied, unceded, seized territory of the Gabrielino Tonga and Gabrielino Quiche people. And with that, we will now have roll call.
Thank you and good evening, Commissioners. Commissioner Sullivan.
Here.
Commissioner Mattos.
Present.
Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Hoopengarner.
Present.
Commissioner Carvalero.
Here.
Vice Chair Gregoire.
Here.
Chair Lombardi.
Present.
And we have a 7-member quorum.
Okay, thank you. Next up is approval of the agenda, but I do have a couple of housekeeping items. So the first one that I want to note is, as we've all experienced here, the machines that we're tapping on are sometimes a little bit laggy. So I want to try to make sure that this is as smooth as possible. We do need to use the machines so that we can record the votings. So if you do request to speak, you can use that. If you want to make a motion, please make sure you tap the screen. I've definitely seen where it's blank or it does not read whoever tapped the screen. So make sure that if you want that to be heard right away, if I'm not seeing it, just feel free to jump in and say I'd like to make a motion. I'd recommend doing both because we know that they have a glitch where sometimes it doesn't read the right person or we get a blank. So use the machine, but also speak, and I'll try to do my best. And with that being said, I did want to turn this over to our city attorney, Isaac Rosen, to speak on a unique item on tonight's consent calendar before the commission votes on the approval of the agenda, understanding that there has been a significant interest from the community on a consent calendar item today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to the Commission. So if the Commission will bear with me for a moment, I just wanted to articulate for the record, and as the Chair mentioned, we do have an item and have received some public comment on the consent calendar item this evening. The sole purpose of tonight's consent calendar item on 910 to 916 Weatherly Drive is transparency for the public. The item doesn't contemplate substantive review or action by the Planning Commission at this time. So in an effort to provide extraordinary notice to the public and to all of you as decision makers on a project of significant community interest, the city staff did notice that consent calendar item regarding a community development director approved minor amendment for that project. And that amendment was approved on February 13th. So should the commission as a body have factual or objective questions regarding that item, we would recommend moving this item to excluded consent calendar, item 13. However, I did want to note our office does strongly advise commissioners against any comments, opinions, or statements regarding this minor amendment or other related issues that could be raised on an appeal, as doing so may disqualify that commissioner from being able to consider a filed appeal. And for the public's benefit, the appeal period on this minor amendment closes this coming Monday, February 24th at 5 p.m. If filed, the commission would be the body that would formally consider that appeal, which may include questions regarding the provisions on minor or major amendments under the city's municipal code and the specific changes contemplated in the consent calendar item. And additionally, since the item is a consent calendar receive and file, the city did not notice tonight's item as a public hearing that would meet due process principles. So to recap, I know this is a lengthy statement. City staff agendized this item in the interest of transparency. There's no formal action considered. Should the commission have factual or objective questions they wish to discuss, we recommend the commission move the item to excluded consent. Thank you.
Thank you. And if that's not enough, I have one more thing to add, since there's a lot to process today. Item 10D, staff is recommending that that item be continued to a date uncertain. So that could be included for efficiency in the motion as well. And I actually see that Commissioner Matos has requested a motion if my screen's accurate right now.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move the agenda for today as proposed with the continuance of item 10D. Do I have a second?
I
Second. I heard so many seconds. Yeah, Commissioner Carvalero.
I have a question for staff.
Question for staff before we vote. Please proceed.
How many public speakers are there for the consent item 8A?
So no one can speak on the consent item, but people may choose to speak during public comment.
I appreciate
And-
that.
Yes. So that being said, I'll help you with that. Secretary Gillig, I know we didn't have too many people earlier, but has that changed in the last few minutes?
We have one on Zoom, and I have 4 here in chambers that have signed up to speak on the Weatherly project.
Okay. Commissioner Hoopengartner, did you have any other questions?
No.
Okay. And the screen is not working for me to vote.
Just so you guys know what I see on my screen, and I know that they're not synced because I can see some on other people's screens. I just see motion without no motioner, and there's no second.
Same here.
Oh, nice.
Mine says Commissioner Matos requests a motion.
Same here.
And we can just announce for the record with the technical difficulty. So the motion was moved by Commissioner Matos and seconded by Commissioner Carvalero.
Yes.
Okay.
Do
And
we
so
need to do a roll call vote?
You can, if
I can see the voting now, yeah.
Oh, now it's working. Great.
And the motion passes to approve the agenda as presented, with noting 6 ayes and Commissioner Hoopengartner voting no on this item.
Okay, item 6 is approval of the minutes dated February 6th, 2024. And does staff have any notes or amendments to the minutes? I'll take that as a no. Anyone like to make a motion?
I'll move.
I'll second.
Okay, and we seem to be stuck on the screen again, so
It was a motion by Commissioner Jones, seconded by
yes,
Matos.
yes, correct.
Oh, no, Carvalero was the second.
Oh.
Apologies.
Okay, thank you. Do we want to go to roll call voting, David, or are we?
It seems like it's just the motioning. I'm seeing the voting on my screen.
Okay.
Except for sometimes you push to vote and it doesn't record your vote. You have to
There's
push a couple
Yeah,
times.
there's a delay.
Yeah.
I'm only over communicating because I know that there were issues at the last meeting.
Yes.
So I'm just going to read out loud what it says on my screen.
Thank you.
And the motion passes unanimously, voting all votes aye, approving the minutes for February 6, 2025 as presented.
Okay, thank you. Item 6 is public comment, and I will note that if you wish to speak on anything relating to the 910 to 916 Weatherly project, that would be, your opportunity would be now during public comment, or there is another public comment at the end of our meeting as well.
Correct. We'll start in chambers. Our first public speaker will be Arthur Bernstein. Arthur, you will be followed by Susan Rosenblatt.
Good evening. Arthur Bernstein, West Hollywood resident. I'm objecting tonight to the 8A being on the consent calendar and instead asking that it be calendared for a planning commission for a full review. The changes that were requested in the amendment were wrongly and negligently categorized as minor when in fact we believe they are major. Just to mention a few, such as moving a loud rumbling electrical transformer to the outside of the building as close as possible to neighboring buildings and sidewalks, and placed onto a concrete pad sitting on an earthquake fault is major, not minor. Suggesting that this was at the request of Southern California Edison is incorrect and misleading. Eliminating the much-needed green roof on the building is major, not minor. Eliminating several trees near the buffer area between the property lines is major, not minor, especially when council gave the developer a variance to the setback rules for no good reason at the very last moment. Changing the formation of the balconies in the building, thus making the building a building that has always been too large and out of scale with the neighborhood is major, not minor. Removing amenities in the building, such as a fitness center, is major, not minor. These are just certain issues that were requested, and when taken as a whole, they are not at all an improvement to the building, to its future residents, or to the community at large. I ask that you please remove this item from the consent calendar tonight and not to sweep it under the rug, as these are major changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Susan Rosenbluth, followed by Martha Oriolano. You'll have 3 minutes. Please state your name and city of residence.
Good evening. My name is Susan Rosenbluth, and I am a resident of West Hollywood. I live directly across from the proposed building, and I want to join Mr. Bernstein and all of the neighbors who could not make it tonight in objecting to the lack of transparency that would occur if this item remains on the calendar, on the consent calendar. That would give the Planning Commission no opportunity to actually consider the consequences of all of these changes, several of which on their own I think actually that they're all major, but even if one were proposed, I think you commissioners should have the benefit of an understanding of what the consequences are likely to be, rather than a yes or no. Yes, let's just say yes to the developers, because that's what generally has been occurring on this project. I do believe that if these changes do occur, it will be detrimental to the neighborhood. Given that I live right across the street, I know that having a major transformer that is likely to produce significant noise pollution 24/7 will immediately and forevermore alter the quality of my life and of the neighborhood. So I request that full consideration be given to all the requests by this developer, and that you all have the benefit of as much input as possible for your own consideration. The neighborhood would appreciate transparency, and so I'm glad that our legal counsel has that as a concern. We have never felt that this project was, in fact, at all transparent, and so we are here tonight in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker will be Martha. Martha will be followed by our last speaker here in chambers, Victor Olmachenko.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Martha Oriana, and I live right across from this proposed building. Planning commissioners, you know your mission as you have, and you exercise all the powers, duties, and rights and privileges and authorities of city planning commission as set forth by the state planning and zoning law. So, accordingly, I would ask you to remove the 9:30 Weatherly from today's consent calendar. This is not just pro forma minor changes to the plans that were laid out and specified last year. It seems that under the cover of darkness, all of a sudden, all these changes were made. Now, I know that they have hired, WHCHC had hired 2 major architects, and they never realized that these changes were to happen before that. And all of a sudden, on the cover of darkness, and on February 13th, we get no notification, other than 2 people in this entire neighborhood were notified of these changes. If we hadn't been, we wouldn't even know what all the possibilities of all the changes that were put through for this particular building. It needs to be discussed. It needs to be brought up to the light of day. There's so many items in there that the previous speakers mentioned. One of them was that it's on an earthquake fault. The plate itself for this transformer is on an earthquake fault, right smack in it. And supposedly this was meant to be inside and away from the earthquake fault. So I think there's a lot of things for you guys to consider to do your jobs. Too many items that were agreed upon by all parties are being changed. And again, this is very sub rosa. Why? Why are they doing this? Please restore your constituents' trust and have a public hearing with due notices sent to all, not just 3 people. That's just not the way that we used to do things. So I trust that you will do the right thing. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. And our last speaker here in chambers will be Victor Omolchenko.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Victor Omolchenko, a longtime West Hollywood resident and a former Public Facilities Commissioner. And I actually came here to talk about several other items, but then as I looked at the recent correspondence for this coming from the concerned neighbors, I was kind of surprised by this recent development. So let me just say that I've been involved in historic preservation. I am a supporter of affordable housing, and it takes a fine balance. But I'm also a believer in process. And I can't believe the convoluted explanation that is being given by our legal staff of the city here regarding, yes, you can talk about it, no, you can't talk about it, there may be appeal. The appeal deadline is on Monday, February 23rd. When would I, as a concerned citizen, beyond the 500 feet of this project, since the West Hollywood Preservation Alliance was involved, when would I have known about a February 13th action that was taken that could then be appealed by the public? What's going on here? I don't like it. I think this whole thing, this SOP saying this is government transparency, what in the hell is going on? And that's the last bad 4-letter word I will use. This whole city, there's something bad happening. Consent items, items on the city council. You're all appointed by city council members except for the 2 at-large members. More and more, the public is seeing important unfinished business items, new business items, all buried in the consent calendar. There is no transparency. There should be more transparency. It happens at the HPC. They put things on consent, an annual report. Now it's happening here. I want to know how, as a resident concerned here in the city of West Hollywood, I would have known that I could have appealed something. I think we need to have a community conversation. And if I could just say to you, those of you who are on the Long Range Committee, citizens don't have that much money and they don't have that much time, but others do. And 10 days for whatever kind of appeal must be done from the day that an action is taken by a body such as yours is not enough. It should be expanded to at least 2 weeks, 15 days, because we need more time to be able to address these non-transparent issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor. And that is our last public speaker in chambers. I will turn it over. I believe we have one on our Zoom platform.
Yes, our next speaker will be Rebecca. Rebecca, you have 3 minutes. Please state your name and city of residence and *6 to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hi, council members. I would like to ditto what Mr. Almanchenko has said. I'm a little surprised at the irony of transparency in which legal has stated that they gave this, this was put on consent for transparency. That is not accurate at all. You know, most of us in West Hollywood are working, and when we get a national holiday that's a 3-day weekend, and we find out about something like this last minute, that we don't understand how staff could even assume that this is a minor change, and you have legals constantly repeating this is minor. It is not minor. Both council, Jones and Lombardi, were at the beginning of this project in design review. They have seen that WHCHC has not listened to any of the community members, are not doing things in the best interest of the residents. You know, from the beginning, it was requested that there be much needed green space. So a rooftop garden green space was to be put in, as well as green space along the side of the building. From a mechanical standpoint, it was always agreed that mechanical was going to be in the garage, so it wouldn't be a nuisance to anyone in the neighborhood because it's a small infill street and there's never been something this large and big before. On top of it, the building, by both the design review and at the planning review, it was said the building was too bulky, so the architect suggested they remove some balconies, indented the appearance of the building in order to change the bulkiness. All three of those things have now been changed in the middle of a holiday weekend, with legal saying this should go to consent and nobody should talk about it in case there's an appeal, when you had 1,000 people bringing up a petition about this project. What is going on here? Landscape architect was supposed to present the landscaping of this whole project. It's never been submitted, or if it was never shown to us. It wasn't ready at the planning commission when you guys building, where the only green area for the 89 units was going to be, that was at one point maybe a dog run, then it was going to have trees. Now there's a cement pad. This is wrong. All of these things they have done with the balconies, adding back balconies, is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chair, that is our last public speaker for this item.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move along to item 7, which is the director's report.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. Nick Marisich, Director of Community Development. I know you have a full agenda tonight, so I'll jump right in. Earlier this week on Tuesday, we presented to Council the latest quarterly update on major development projects in the city. It was item E2 on the Council agenda for anyone who may be interested. The staff report and associated attachments can be downloaded directly from the posted online agenda on the city's website. Back in June of 2023, the City Council requested to receive these reports, and we've expanded them over time to encompass additional project types, such as those requesting approval under the builder's remedy provisions of state law. And for the first time with this report, standalone billboard projects proposed under the Sunset Arts and Advertising program. There are 2 spreadsheets and accompanying maps of these projects. The first covers major commercial and mixed-use projects, of which there are 15 total, and builder's remedy applications, of which there are 5. The second spreadsheet and map describe additional projects that are part of the Sunset Arts and Advertising program, of which there are 31. As part of this item, I provided an update on the Melrose Triangle project, sharing the news that the entitlements for the previously approved project have now expired. and no new project has been proposed by the property owner for the site at this time. Given the excavation work that took place on the site, the city has required the applicant to secure the necessary permits to backfill the excavated area and restore the site in a timely manner. The applicant is planning to host a pre-construction community meeting, which is required by the city's municipal code, on Wednesday, February 26th at 10 a.m., 3 p.m., and 6:30 p.m. The meeting will be held via Zoom, and additional information, including the meeting instructions and access information, can be found on a website that the owner has set up, which is www.melrose-triangle.com. The owner has also set up an email address, melrosetriangle@gmail.com, where community members can reach out if they have questions. Next, I'd like to announce our upcoming community workshops on the Zoning Improvement Program for Housing, or ZIP. I know you'll be getting a staff presentation on this program later this evening, but I did want to highlight the upcoming opportunities for community members to get engaged in this program. Interested residents or other stakeholders, please plan to join us on March 5th, in person or online on March 11th. And this is a process to update local zoning requirements in support of new housing opportunities. The city's evaluating future zoning updates to reduce barriers to creating housing, and the recommendations will prioritize affordability and how new housing development aligns with community demographics and the city's diverse housing needs. These events will provide a space for community members to share their experience and ideas for the future of housing in West Hollywood. Again, the meeting dates and times are as follows: March 5th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at Plummer Park, rooms 5 and 6, and then March 11th from 12 to 1 p.m. on the Zoom platform. Online registration and more information can be found online at www.engage.weho.org/zip. That's ZIP. And one more important item to note that's regarding our upcoming joint study session with the Planning Commission and the City Council, which is scheduled for this coming Monday, February 24th at 6 p.m. here in Council Chambers. The agenda for this meeting, I believe, was posted today and describes the structure of the study session, but I wanted to highlight it for you here. First, staff will be giving an overview of development agreements and the public benefit policy, as well as the Planning Commission and City Council's roles in each. Next, staff will pose questions for discussion, with the mayor chairing the meeting and leading the discussion. There will be a chance to take public comment on the topics. And then finally, the City Council will provide feedback or direction, if any, to staff. Just to note that if there is direction from the City Council on this topic, staff will memorialize this by bringing it forward as a future agenda item for the City Council. As far as preparation, we anticipate distributing some reference materials ahead of the meeting, which will be helpful resources for the discussion. So stay tuned for that. And this concludes my report for tonight. I know that you are all volunteers, so we thank you for your commitment to serving the city, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for our Community Development Director? No? Okay, thank you. Okay, item 8A was already voted on during approval of the agenda. Are we good with that, Isaac? Yes, okay, thank you. So item 9, public hearing, section 1, project subject to Housing Accountability Act. We have none, which then brings us to item 10A, public hearings, other items that require public hearing under the law. And item 10A is 1216 North Flores Street. And we'll now begin with a staff report. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Lombardi and Commissioners. Before you is a request to approve a tract map for a 14-unit residential building located at 1216 North Flores Street that was previously approved by the Planning Commission in September 2015, appealed to the City Council with the Planning Commission's decision to approve the project upheld in November 2016 into a common interest development. The final map process was never acted on and has since expired. Not sharing. The project was designed and approved to comply with the requirements of the R4B zoning district. Staff recommends approval of the subdivision permit as previously approved by the Planning Commission and conditioned in the draft resolution. The building is still under construction and has not obtained a certificate of occupancy. That concludes my presentation. Staff are available for any questions you may have.
Okay, before any questions, do my colleagues have any disclosures to make? Okay. Any questions for staff? Yes, Commissioner Hoopengarner.
Yes, for legal, normally when we do a subdivision, there's a paragraph on the CC&Rs and the requirements of the CC&Rs. And I see only a section relating to the affordable housing. Is there a reason that that particular paragraph was excluded from this subdivision?
Commissioner Hoopengarner, I was just checking to make sure I'm looking at the correct resolution. I do see reference to the CC&Rs under condition of approval 4.3, but happy to answer questions if that's if there's a more specific request on those.
I'm sorry, I did miss that because it was under submittals and not under the normal section. I'm used to seeing it in the, there's another section that usually contains. Thank you very much for that.
No problem. Any other questions? Well then, is there an applicant present that would like to speak on this hearing item before we move along? Okay. Okay, so we could hear from the public if there's any public commenters. We do not have any. Okay, are there any questions for the applicant? The applicant is available. No questions? Okay, then we will move along. We did not need to open or close the public hearing, so we can now move on to deliberation. Does anyone want to speak or make a motion? Commissioner Jones?
I don't want to get out too far ahead of my skis, but I would like to make a motion to approve staff's recommendation.
I'll second Commissioner Jones's motion.
Okay, great. And I'll just take a quick pause here to make sure that there's no further questions. Otherwise, we can move to voting.
Chair, the electronic voting shows actually Commissioner Hoopengarner has made the motion.
And I did not see it.
Show that? You don't see that?
Mine actually showed Matos, so
Yeah,
I'm going to go with what I
had pushed
saw.
the button when we were moving, but I withdrew it when Commissioner Jones made the request.
So I'd like to suggest that the motion came from Commissioner Jones because I saw contradictory information here, and then seconded by Matos.
Matos. Okay, fine. We'll read that
Thank
into
you.
the record then.
And thank you for the clarification.
Motion by Commissioner Jones, seconded by Commissioner Matos. And the motion passes unanimously, approving resolution number 25-1596. There is an appeal process. I don't have a screen at this time, so I'll just read it into the record. The resolution of the Planning Commission just approved memorializes the Commission's final action on this matter. This subject is action to appeal to the City Council. Appeals must be submitted within 10 calendar days from this date to the City Clerk's office. Appeals must be in writing and accompanied by the required fees. The City Clerk's office can provide appeal form and information about waiver of fees. And the appeal deadline will be Monday, March 3rd, 2025 at 5 p.m.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is item 10B, 7748 Santa Monica Boulevard and 1054 North Genesee Avenue. And this is a public hearing regarding a request for a conditional use permit to allow the conversion of this property from residential unit to commercial office use. And we can now jump into the staff report as soon as staff is ready.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Roger Rath. I'm the Associate Planner here with the Current and Historic Preservation Planning Team. I wanted to start off by apologizing that it seems like there's a network issue, so I can't connect to our drive, so I can't share a PowerPoint. But, you know, I can share the information that was on the PowerPoint. So if that's okay, I'm going to proceed.
Are we good to proceed? I guess we'll have to see where the discussion leads in case there's any confusion. But the information is publicly available if there's an internet connection. We're good? Isaac? Yes?
Correct. Roger will, as stated, Mr. Rath will read into the record the information regarding the item, and as you noted, Chair, it is available on the publicly posted agenda.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. So as Chair Lombardi mentioned, that this is a request for a conditional use permit to convert a 1,062 square feet residential unit into an office use. No construction or physical modifications are proposed. So the project site is located in a commercial community 1, CC1 zoning district with a mixed use incentive overlay. The frontage of the property is 25 feet facing Santa Monica between Genesee Avenue and Spalding Avenue. The site currently includes Farm Cup Coffee, which is a commercial use, and a detached residential unit in the rear. The property is 3,125 square feet with 2 structures built in 1923 and 1924. So the front structure, which is the Farm Cup Coffee, is 1,534 square feet, and the rear structure is 1,062 square feet, which is that detached residential structure. Access to the residential unit can only be accessed via the public alley. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's no proposed construction or modification. So the conversion to existing 1,062 residential unit into an office use, there's, again, I mentioned no changes to the structure as it maintains the same floor plan. Farm Cup Coffee remains unchanged, and there's no lasting impacts to the infrastructure, ensuring flexibility for redevelopment. So in my PowerPoint, I had a slide that shows why this item is before you. It's located in the land use table requiring a CUP for a mixed-use residential conversion to a commercial use. So the part of that requirement requires that it meets section 19.36.290, which basically ensures compliance with rental unit conversion regulations. So that's further explained on page 4 of the staff report, and it's also conditioned to comply with these requirements in condition of approval 3.2. In addition to the requirements outlined in the West Hollywood Municipal Code, we also reviewed relevant state laws to ensure full compliance. While California Government Code section for no net loss applies to this project, we also examine another section which governs the demolition of residential dwelling units. However, since this project does not involve any physical demolition or structural alterations, that section does not apply because the project does not involve, again, physical demolition, structural alterations, or removal of exterior walls or the foundation. California Government Code section 65863 mandates that cities maintain sufficient housing capacity throughout the planning period. In this case, the project involves the conversion of 1 residential unit into office use. Although this results in the loss of 1 residential unit, as well as the potential for 8 residential units identified in the housing elements suitable site inventory, the project remains in compliance with the no net loss requirements. The City of West Hollywood has a significant buffer above its required housing capacity. In fact, that the remaining capacity from sites identified in the housing elements suitable site inventory and forecasted capacity from projects in the entitlement and permitting pipeline totals 3,235 units, which far exceeds the current and remaining arena numbers obligations of 2,350 units. This means that even with this loss, the city can still meet its housing targets. So to be clear, no net loss is ensured because the city exceeds arena numbers by 885 units, which provides a substantial buffer to accommodate future housing needs and aligns with the city's broader housing goals. So in summary, it is staff assessment that the proposed conversion at 1054 Genesee Avenue and 7748 Santa Monica Boulevard meets all the required findings, does not impede the implementation of the general plan, and is consistent with the provision of the zoning ordinance For these reasons, staff recommends that the commission approve the request, subject to the finding and conditions of approval in the draft resolution. I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any disclosures before we move to questions for staff? No? Any questions for staff? Commissioner Hoopengarner?
Just one. Does this preclude this from becoming a live-work unit?
Sorry, you're asking if it precludes live-work units? No, so that's the land use, and they would be able to apply for live-work if they would want to.
So
Yeah.
it's currently residential. This application is moving it to commercial.
That's correct.
And live-work is neither. We've had that discussion before.
It's its own land use on the land use table.
So if someone chose to use this now zoned, if we approve this zoned commercial, use it as a live-work, that would be acceptable?
So they would have to look at the land use table and see what type of applications required for a land use type of land use.
But
So
they would have to make an application.
They do, yes, because this is an application for a commercial use specifically. So if they want to do a live work, they would have to do the proper application process for that.
To change it again?
Yes, that's
Okay,
right.
thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
I just have one quick question, if I may, Chair, just for the good of the order. If at any time they decide to put that housing stock back onto the market, they would be able to do so, correct, through the current process?
Yes, they can come back. They have requirements that they would have to meet with the housing department, but yes, they can bring that back.
And per the staff report, the unit's been empty for some time and was owner-occupied previously.
I'm so sorry, can you speak up?
The unit has been empty for some time and was previously owner-occupied?
Oh, yes, yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
I actually have one question that I saw in the attachment that I don't have open right now on the application. It stated what the current rental cost of the unit was, which I believe is also part of the calculation if it becomes part of rental housing stock again, and it said $0. So I think there was a calculation to apply what it would become if it came back again, but if it's quoted at $0, what does that mean? Or did I just make an assumption when I saw that form, and are you holding a different number?
So the unit was owner occupied before, so they have different type of requirements and regulations under the housing department. So if they were to bring it back into the housing market and it's still owner occupied, then they have the requirements that they're required to meet. But if it does go back on the housing stock to the public, then there is a table that the housing department have them follow in terms of what's the appropriate rental cost.
Yeah, and not to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering what it means if it reads as 0 or owner occupied, what that would mean. Since a more typical case would be, I'm just going to throw numbers out there. It was $800, and then per the table, it brings it to whatever value. So I'm curious what it means if it's owner occupied or if it's quoted as $0 of rental value. Or maybe we could come back to that.
Yeah, I don't think we have a specific answer for that for you. We can see if we can find out, but at this point we don't have an answer on that. Yeah.
I'll leave that until deliberation. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, is there an applicant here that would wish to speak, or?
Yeah, there is an applicant in the audience. Did you want to speak?
Or do we want to do public comment first, if we have anyone?
Yeah, I would say the applicant should come to the mic for any.
Okay.
Yeah, if there's anything specific.
Secretary Gillig, does anyone want to speak on this item?
Yes, we do have one speaker in
So-
chambers, Victor Omolchenko.
Thank you.
Victor, you have 3 minutes.
Victor Omolchenko, longtime West Hollywood resident. Well, this is the item that I came to speak on because I live in the neighborhood. I'm a rent-stabilized tenant on Laurel, but I go to my favorite deli at the corner of Genesee and Santa Monica Boulevard. It's the New York Deli, and it's known for its delicious borscht and other items. I noticed the sign displayed for this project, and I just was curious about this, and so I went around the back. I saw the house that's in the back. That's the address of 1054 North Genesee, and then the coffee shop at the front. Well, what I'd like to read into the record or just share with you is, at a time when the housing crisis has been further exacerbated by the recent tragic wildfires, what is the reasoning for allowing even one precious West Hollywood housing unit, and it's rent stabilized, I believe, to be converted into commercial office space? The staff report contorts itself into justifying this conversion with arcane language related to the housing element. We hear, yes, we have to show that we can get about 4,000 new housing units into the city. And now we're hearing, oh, but it's okay because we're above 855 in terms of deliberating about this case. So I find it rather confusing and convoluted. And to me, there appears to be a lot of commercial office space for rent now throughout the city. And regarding the question about the MAR, which is 0 in the accompanying documentation, it's good to know that this project could come back as a rent-stabilized unit, but at what level, since it's been empty for a while? So if whoever moves into the commercial office space that this wants to be converted into, and then it wants to be turned back into a residential space under the rent control, maybe $3,000 for the nice house on the alley, who knows? But I believe city staff should know these kinds of details when commissioners like Mr. Lombardi asks you, what is going on here again? So what I just ask is, I look forward to your discussing this issue and to see whether, what's the reasoning? Is this a good conversion? Does this conversion, commissioners, does it help us address the affordable housing crisis that we continually hear about in this city? This is a rent-stabilized unit. You would think that in a city that wants to preserve its rent-stabilized housing, why would you be converting this unless there are very extremely important reasons? Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Victor. And Chair, that is our last public speaker for this item.
Okay, thank you. Now the applicant does have the opportunity for a rebuttal. So if you want to start with that, please make sure you state your name and city of residence. And typically you'd have 5 minutes. I don't know if you plan to use all 5, but we also didn't have the presentation. Thank you.
Diego Torres-Paul is my name. Thank you for taking the time. I'm the current property owner. This request is not asked lightly. Right next to our building, there's a bar. It's called Apartment 200. You guys may have heard of it. The unit that I had available, I certainly actually enjoy it as a residential unit. The issue is the apartment is a nightclub, and they're allowed to be up until 2 in the morning. There's also been a shooting at this nightclub on Santa Monica Boulevard. It essentially has rendered the property useless. As an owner, I am just trying to facilitate a place where we can meet in the middle. I've spoken to the business at length. My mother, 71-year-old woman, actually lived in this unit. It's not been easy. My mom is pro-business. Her son is an entrepreneur. That's me. And so it is never my intention to reduce the housing unit, especially at this time. But if you guys know a tenant that's willing to live in a place where there's music bumping going on until 2 in the morning, please let me know. This is the perfect place for them. Unfortunately, we've tried for about 2 years to find said resident, and the best I can find is my mom. So in that, we hope to make it live work, to answer your question. And I think this is a compromise that allows the business to stay alive and allows the property to exist in a different way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If we have questions for the applicant, I know I have one, but I'll wait for my colleagues first. Oh, okay. Would you want to ask the staff question now, or do you want to hear from applicant questions? It depends.
We can finish applicant questions.
Okay. Just, I figure it depends on what the question is, if it's pertinent first. Commissioner Matos, did you have questions? No?
No.
No? Okay. Well, the first question I was going to ask, actually, I have a different one now. I'm curious why you're not looking to pursue live work, since you mentioned that, and this is just commercial.
I think phase one of this is to approve it for commercial, and then the phase two of it will be to apply formally for live work.
Okay. And then I just wanted to ask if you've read through the requirements for the conversion and the necessary extensions. I think that was condition 3.1 in the resolution.
Yes.
Okay. Shall be completed within 6 months. No extensions shall be considered unless requested at least 30 days prior to the expiration date. So that makes me presume anything that you're planning to do will happen at an expeditious rate, yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was the last question I had. Are there any other questions? Okay. Then I will close the public comment portion of this hearing, and we can go back to deliberation. Oh, but there's a staff question, and I think staff has something to add too. So, Commissioner Jones.
I do have a quick question, and my apologies if I missed this earlier. When we talk in the staff report, it's mentioned that any displaced tenants would have right of first refusal, given that it was owner occupied. Does this mean that it would be relisted publicly as a rental unit? Or would the owner have right of first refusal? I'm not super familiar with owner occupation of rent stabilized units, so I'm just curious how that works.
Right. I think that if it's the same owner, they would have the same kind of rights and access to it, to being owner occupied, as they did before. So it kind of renders the question of right of first refusal moot in some way.
Okay.
And to answer the question about the rent would be set at market rate, just like any other rent stabilized unit that is vacated and rented to somebody new.
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm clear on that. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for staff or the applicant? Otherwise, again, closing public comment portion of the hearing, and we can go to deliberation. If anyone has anything they'd like to say, otherwise, if someone would like to make a motion. My screen says nothing, so if there's Vice Chair Gregoire.
Yeah, I guess I would just say that I support staff's recommendation. Yes, it's always a shame to lose a residential unit since we're trying so hard to add housing to the city. In this case, it was owner occupied by the property owner, by the business owner, and it sounds like they have good reasons why they think they can make better use of it for commercial use at this point. I see no reason not to grant the property owner's request here. So when the time comes, I will support a motion to approve staff's recommendation.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Commissioner Jones, Commissioner Hoopengarner.
I would just like to agree. I mean, it is unfortunate we're about to, hear about the ZIP program and, oh my goodness, we need housing, and now we're talking about taking away housing. But I fully support the owner's right to do what they wish with their property and what they need to do with their property. I think it's very unfortunate that the situation has made the property basically uninhabitable. It does speak to our future decisions about projects that are butt up against other projects and what potential impacts there are. But I would support this application, and obviously live work may not be tenable either. If it's not tenable for a tenant, it's not going to be tenable for live work. So it seems an ideal location for it, but I would support staff's recommendation.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, motion by Commissioner Hoopen-Garner. Would you like to state your motion?
My motion is to approve staff's recommendation.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to second? Seconded by Vice Chair Gregoire.
Just so everyone knows, that time I did see that Commissioner Hoopen-Garner made a motion and that Commissioner Vice Chair Gregoire seconded it.
Maybe,
Just for the record.
maybe you can be my eyes for the next one.
Well, not everyone's screen is the same. So.
I can see across, and I see hers matching mine, but nobody else's.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, when I look over here, I see their screens matching mine, so for whatever that's worth.
Motion passes. It's unanimously. Approving resolution number PC 25-1600. And we do have an appeal process for this item. The resolution the Planning Commission just approved memorializes the Commission's final action on this matter. This action is subject to appeal to the City Council. Appeals must be submitted within 10 calendar days from this date to the City Clerk's office. Appeals must be in writing and accompanied by the required fees. The City Clerk's office can provide appeal forms and information about waiver of fees. And the appeal deadline will be Monday, March 3rd, 2025 at 5 p.m.
Okay, thank you. Does staff need a minute to get settled? And are we all good? No need for a break yet? Okay, great. So item 10C is the zone text amendment, ministerial housing permits and new entitlement. And we will now begin with the staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Tonight's presentation will be provided by Michelle Montenegro, Associate Planner with the Long Range Planning Division.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners of the Planning Commission. My name is Michelle Montenegro. I'm an Associate Planner here with Long Range Planning Community Development Department. I'll be presenting an item for a zone text amendment on ministerial housing permit. This presentation should take no longer than about 7 minutes to go through. So first, I'll be going through the context and the groundwork of why you are seeing this zone text amendment before you today. Then I'll go through the overview of the actual zone text amendment, and then the recommendation of staff. So as we heard today, there is a housing crisis within the region and state, or arguably the nation as well. This specific chart is a visualization of housing needs from the past 3 decades. It's provided by the California Legislative Analyst Office. So it shows over every year throughout these 3 decades, about 70,000 to 110,000 units were needed. So housing costs in California could be in line with housing escalations in housing elsewhere in the US. This specific chart shows the RHNA progress within the city. So as you all know, housing planning cycle is about 8 years. So we're in the 6th cycle right now, which runs from 2021 to 2029. It shows that we need to reach 3,933 units by the end of 2029. And right now we have 484 housing units. This relies on permitted data. So units attributed to pending applications or entitled applications do not count towards our progress. If we were to linearly forecast out this line, it would show that we would reach about over 1,000 units in 2029, which gives us a shortfall about under 3,000 units. For this reason, the state legislature has introduced several bills to streamline housing production. So a few of these include AB 2011, which allows mixed income and affordable housing developments that meet eligibility criteria in commercial zones. It also includes SB 684, which is ministerial pathways of 10-unit or less housing projects and subdivisions. There are a few others that include supportive housing, transitional housing, and low-barrier housing. So here we have an example of a few bills that shows time to act windows just to highlight the urgency and the rapidness of what we process these applications. The shortest timeline is attributed to SB 684, which is the 10-unit project and subdivision bill. So it gives us only about a 60-day approval time window. And this does include resubmittal of application. We have a comparison here between ministerial and discretionary processes. Ministerial does not rely on personal judgment, but solely on objective standards that we can apply throughout our zoning ordinance. It does not include a public hearing and is typically quicker because no environmental assessment is required as well. Discretionary relies on a broader impact, such as environmental impacts, design, community input, which allows for a public hearing process. For this reason, site-specific conditions can be applied to a project and CEQA is required. As we know, our six-cycle housing element has 2 programs and 4 objectives dedicated to streamlining and ministerial review. I won't read through it, but generally we are looking to reducing projects that can come before the Planning Commission and introducing more ministerial pathways. So the next section will include what is the process and why we're doing this today, the appeal options before you all, and the summary of the code amendments. So today we only have 1 entitlement on the book that can be applied to projects. This is known as a zone clearance. These generally apply to small scale projects such as tenant changes or remodels, and they generally have a week processing time. What's important to note about zone clearances is that it doesn't allow us to comply with housing provisions like an inclusionary housing ordinance or demolition protections of state law. The proposed ministerial housing permit will allow us to review and assess these compliance measures. It also allows us to have a broader framework to make sure we are in compliance with time to act windows. So the proposed recommendation, as drafted in the resolution, does have an appeal process that matches ministerial entitlement today, which includes zone clearances. This would look like an appeal to Planning Commission, followed then by appeal by City Council. There are 2 other options that may be considered by the Planning Commission. One that includes a direct City Council appeal and the other a no appeal. The benefits of a no appeal or a direct City Council appeal will be less processing time. However, another drawback may be that they could be open to litigation. So there's 4 primary sections of this code amendment. The first is the introduction of the ministerial housing permit, Chapter 1943, which establishes the framework. Again, it is broad to accommodate several different state housing bills. The next is an amendment to 1940, which is application, filing, and processing. This asserts that any decision made by the director for a ministerial housing permit is not then rendered a decision by the Planning Commission. An amendment to 1946 design review asserts that those general design standards apply to discretionary projects and not ministerial housing permits, just because they're not objective in nature. And then the last amendment to 1950 demolition permit states that there is a ministerial pathway for demolition permits as required by state law. It can be concurrent processed with the ministerial housing permit, and it does require findings. So our recommendation is to adopt Resolution PC 251598 to introduce Chapter 1943 in the 3 amendments to 1940, 1946, and 1950. And before I conclude, there are a couple of edits to the resolution that we would like to make on the record. I'll do that now. So on page 15 of the resolution, we will be editing subsection 8 of section 1950-045, also known as concurrent processing for a ministerial housing permit, to state an application for a ministerial demolition permit shall not be considered unless accompanied by a complete ministerial housing permit, and excluding except as provided in the subsection C below at the end of that paragraph. The second correction is page 15 to add in the title for discretionary demolition permits so that the section reads 1950-050 findings and decision for discretionary demolition permits. The third of the 4 corrections is an edit to subsection A of 1950-055 findings and decision of a demolition permits for ministerial housing permit to read as a ministerial permit for the new project to be constructed on the site has been approved, and to remove, quote, or alternatively, the requirements of section 1950-040C are satisfied. And then the last edit is addition to the title name of section 1950-060, which will state discretionary demolition permit issuance. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you, and we are available for any questions you may have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for staff? Commissioner Solomon?
Thank you, and thank you to staff for meeting and speaking with me earlier this week. I wanted to ask a couple of questions that is somewhat of a rehash of the conversation that we had earlier in the week, but for the benefit of the whole Planning Commission. In the Long Range Planning Subcommittee, we considered this back in August, and the staff recommendation at that time, and the discussion in the room regarding the appeals procedure was no appeal for a ministerial housing permit. Given that the spirit of the state law and the spirit of what we want to do is to reduce process, like you said. But as we see the staff report laid out tonight in front of us, we have sort of 3 different routes that we can go down. The route that's stated is a 2-pronged appeals process, an appeal to the Planning Commission, and then an appeal to the City Council. Just a single appeal, which would go to council, or no appeal, like we previously discussed. Staff is not settled, but has now recommended the 2-prong approach, and I wondered if you could give some color as to why that has changed.
Sure, absolutely. So the appeal recommendation before you matches the existing appeal for ministerial entitlements. For full transparency, we did take a recommendation for no appeal to the LRP project subcommittee. This was done to ensure a streamlined process. There is a concern with time to act windows that if an appeal process is filed, that the appeal may not be carried through because the time to act window may close before the appeal is actually carried. So that was primarily the reason for no appeals. Other jurisdictions throughout California also have no appeals for their ministerial entitlements. So that was a route that we were comfortable with at the time. But reviewing our code today, we felt that the appeal process should match a ministerial entitlement as it is in the code.
Given that, in my opinion, the most common sort of projects that will come forward through this process are AB 2011 projects and then SB 684 projects. And the time to act window for both of those can be as little as 60 days after a deemed complete application. There must be a final project determination that has exhausted all of the appeals processes. Do you think that in 60 days, we can have a deemed complete application, have a staff project determination, have the 10-day open window where people can file an appeal, go through an appeals process with the Planning Commission, then have a 10-day open period where another appeal can be filed, and then have a City Council appeals decision? And all of that to be done within 60 days. Just looking at some of the recent appeals that have happened, whether at planning or at City Council, it seems like a quick timeline.
I think historically, we know the answer is that it will take longer than that time. However, every project or housing project is a case-by-case basis. So if we get a completed application that meets all the provisions and is easily accessed and reviewed by staff, that there could be the potential to issue a decision earlier in that process and carrying out an appeal process. So it's not a complete no, it's just a risk or a probability.
And is there any sort of mechanism for a hearing body to deny an appeal? Like similar to the Supreme Court, where you're denied cert if you want to bring a case forward to an appellate body, and that appellate body declines to hear the appeal. Is that a mechanism that is currently in place? I think the answer is no, or that could be in place.
So with the proposed ministerial housing permit, and the way that we are structuring it is that those permits will only be approved if the applicant meets all of the objective development standards that are required for that particular development project. Appeals can only be submitted if there is, an error in fact that maybe one of those objective development standards was not actually complied with. So it's going to be pretty black and white whether or not that happened, because it is not subjective anymore. Now it's pretty objective. So we're sort of, if somebody wants to appeal a project, they would have to specify which of those objective development standards they think are not met, and it would be pretty clear whether or not they complied. So in effect, we will not be accepting any appeals if in fact there's no proof of fact that a objective standard had not been met for the project.
So in the appeal application, if the appellant pays the fee or gathers the required number of signatures and states something in their application that is incorrect, nonetheless, they've paid the fee, they've done it within the time window period of time, it sounds like you're saying then that there is discretion from the appellate body or by staff to deny a hearing for that appeal.
Commissioner Solomon, I think you described it accurately. The body that would hear the appeal, whether it's the CDD director or potentially if it's Planning Commission or City Council, has the discretion. And to Director Contreras' point, it would be based on facts, but they would, the appellant would have the opportunity to make the argument, but the appeal body would be looking at whether or not it is actually a legitimate cause of fact. And as Director Contreras said, with ministerial project permits, it is a little more clear than items that come before any appellate body from the director level on up in terms of the discretion that might be involved.
I think that's all my questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My screen says that Commissioner Matos has a question, although I see other screens are missing that. You would like to speak?
Yeah, I just have a quick follow-up to Commissioner Solomon's questions. Thank you, staff, for preparing this proposal. As we've seen, state law has been changing rapidly on how local jurisdictions have discretionary ability here. When we look at the laws before us today, to Commissioner Solomon's point, with the 60-day shot clock for approval, in the event that a project is appealed and then it is moving hypothetically through the planning process to an appeal to planning, as currently written in the code, and then subsequently, if they reappeal, an appeal to City Council, if a decision isn't reached within that 60-day period, is it correct that state law then deems the application complete and it is approved as it was proposed if the city is unable to reach that decision within that 60-day period? Is that correct?
It is my understanding that the project will be deemed approved if the time to act window closes.
So to Commissioner Solomon's point, in the event that there is a two-tiered appeals process and the city is unable to meet those requirements, then it's, regardless of whatever may happen, that project is just approved.
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to ask that as a clarifying question. Thank you so much.
And Commissioner Matos, one add-on to that, I think to your point, we are seeing a lot of law obviously coming down from the state, so things move quickly on the in terms of the changes, but also as Long Range pointed out, this is meant to address a whole series of laws. So the ZTA also bakes into its language to say state law controls, and so the provisions as it might relate to appeal in terms of a deemed complete might be specific to the law. So the zone text amendment contemplates an appeal period, but in terms of a deemed complete and accepted application, that could be based on the specific state law.
Got it. So for example, in your presentation, there were two state laws that specifically had a 60-day shot clock, and I did not see that for the other one. That would then apply to the ones that prevail, right? The laws that prevailed with the 60-day shot clock were subject to that. We're beholden to that.
Correct.
And then in the instances that we aren't, we obviously aren't on the same timeline.
Correct. It's there may be different mechanisms based on the specific state law. So the project applicant submits the project under one of these ministerial approval laws, and staff will determine then the appropriate, certainly the eligibility criteria, but also the follow-up in terms of the required shot clocks.
Understood. It sounds like we only get one bite at the apple at that. Going into just one quick clarifying question, as it relates to these laws and the purely objective standards that are going to be set forth via this ZTA as required by state law, any appeal would be subject to the objective standards that would need to be appealed, not necessarily any type of extracurricular subjective standards. Is that correct? It would have to meet specified criteria in order to be deemed valid?
Correct.
Okay.
It has to be a measurable objective standard.
And that's I think it's outlined in the government code, is that correct?
That's correct.
And the resolution references that government code, so we would be in compliance with that element?
Yes, the ZTA as drafted makes a number of references to sort of the enabling government code section that's applicable to the specific project. So obviously the ZTA is meant to cover a number of these ministerial housing projects, but Long Range has ensured that it also addresses the fact that there might be different enabling statutes under the government code.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Hubengarner. Oh, sorry. I'll get the vice chair next. I'm so sorry.
Yes, so let's go down that path again. And so staff makes a determination, approves the project, appeal is filed, and it comes to, let's say, this body or to council, let's just say this body, and this body finds that an objective standard was not met. What does that do to the 60-day timeline?
So if we're talking specifically about SB 684, which has a 60-day timeline, if the time to act window for that specific bill is ended, then that project is deemed approved, even if it's still in the city appeal process. But as Isaac mentioned, there may be differences among state bills, so we're just talking specifically about the most reduced time to act window for SB 684.
So if it went through this body and this body said there was an objective standard that was incorrect, and it went to council and council said the objective standard was incorrect, and that all happened within the 60 days, it would still be approved?
No, I'm sorry. If it all happened within the 60 days, then that's fine. Then
the project would not be approved.
Correct. It's only if the time to act window closes before that's done that the project approved.
Okay.
And Commissioner Hubengarner, just a little more detail on that, because I think it's a really important point. The authority vested with the appeals body, as you mentioned, would be looking at what is eligible on a ministerial project approval. So, to the extent that the question is on objective fact, where it's not a subjective determination, the appeal body is making that eligibility criteria on appeal from director level approval or whom it is, and then it's incumbent on the project applicant, if they disagree with that determination of the final appeal.
Okay. This begs then the question, we have left a number of things in our code purposely vague to allow for developers to, develop projects to meet various different goals and guidelines, et cetera, et cetera. But there are certain things that we have consistently applied that are not codified. I'll just use an example, white stucco. It's something that we have consistently discouraged, voted against, and said, don't do it. But it's not in the code. So when you went through this review process, did you at any point say, gee, there are certain things that we don't have as objective standards that perhaps should be given this new ministerial process?
So in this specific work item, no, we did not. However, there is an active work plan to reevaluate objective development standards, and that is being done through the zoning improvement program for housing. So that is the opportunity for community input, elected official input to really shape what those objective development standards look like. However, what can be applied with these projects under the ministerial housing permit is codified objective standards or objective standards that have been standardized and released to developers, for example, conditions on a website, things like that, that has to consistently and predictably be applied throughout all the projects.
Okay, so but you just threw in something there that's important, something on the website. That's not in the zoning ordinance. So it's on the website. Does that make it an objective standard? Because we have a lot of design guidelines and things that are on websites and in different guideline books that are not in our exact zoning ordinance. And if this ministerial approval is being limited to the zoning ordinance, you just said that that includes the website, but does it or doesn't it?
Includes all objective standards. So in a guideline manual or book, for example, if there are objective standards and they have been consistently and predictably applied through housing projects, then that is a standard that has to be upheld.
Regardless of whether or not it's in the zoning ordinance specifically.
It has to be standardized, and it has to be presented to developers ahead of time, and it has to be presented on the website, for example, or a public platform.
Okay, all right. It's sort of like the construction management program and all of that. They're all specific.
For example, yeah, like a construction mitigation plan, all that. The standards, exactly.
Okay. Help me with the noticing process on this. We just experienced that with the item on consent tonight, and absent someone on staff, calling someone in the neighborhood, there was no noticing on that item, and I thank staff for putting it on consent and bringing it to the neighborhood's attention, because it is an important project. In the absence of an official noticing program, how would anyone in the community know that one of these ministerial permits had been approved? Or even know that there was an application?
Sure. So as it's written today, notices will be sent out within 30 calendar days of the application filing to the following, which includes surrounding residents. So it's at the application filing time. If there is a building permit being issued, that would also be a different process through site posting.
Mm-hmm. I saw that. And if I recall, it was 200 feet, not 500 feet? Did I get that wrong?
One moment, please. Oh, it is 500 feet radius for the mail notices.
But when the approval is done, how would they know? Because that's when the 60-day window.
No, the 60 days.
60 days starts on the application date.
Yes.
Okay. So, but how would the community know what staff has decided, or when they decided it?
So that through the site posting, that will be on the property from 30 days within application filing all the way until the decision is made, including the appeal window for in the time to act window still.
Okay. And in the absence of that being done, what happens in the appeal process?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the absence of a site posting.
Of the noticing being done.
I'm so sorry, can you repeat the question?
We have instances already where construction notices are not being posted on fencing. Noticing is not being done. So in the event that noticing is not done, and is, the noticing, the initial application noticing is not done and/or the appeals process noticing is not done, what happens in this process and what rights does the community have in that process if those items are not complied with?
Yeah, I mean that's hypothetical that we could potentially address by having people follow that particular project in our new permitting system, which I believe is a tool that is going to be available or coming soon, and I'm hoping that's something that's correct. So when applications are submitted, folks can actually follow or track the progress of a particular permit application. So for instance, if we post that particular permit is being processed for ministerial housing permit on a particular project, folks can hopefully go into the our new permitting system and follow and track that permit, so that if in fact they're not aware that something got approved, they might be notified by the system itself, or they can actually check the system if something's been approved.
And I appreciate that, but my question is, if the requirement is that the applicant post it on their site physically on the date of application, and that they post on the site physically the decision by staff and notice of the appeal period, and that is not done, given that it's part of this zoning ordinance, what are the consequences for the appeal process?
Let us think about that, Commissioner, and we'll get back.
I mean, if a citizen's clock starts ticking based upon those noticing dates, and those noticing dates are not complied with, does the citizen lose their rights under the appeal process, or what? I mean, there's a 60-day window, and I understand that, and I appreciate that, but the fact is, if you're stating in the ordinance that these are the requirements, there's nothing in here that states what happens if those requirements are not met.
Commissioner Hoopengard, so the noticing and the site posting does occur with an affidavit. The affidavit is part of the completed application. I would argue the lack of an affidavit for a site posting may deem the application incomplete. So that could be a case that requires resubmittal, which then would require site posting affidavit to happen. So it's part of, I would consider it like any other standard that is required as part of the application, and that includes all the other exhibits that are required as part of the application as well.
I don't mean to belabor this, but it has happened, okay? I have a project around the corner from me where the applicant did not post anything. The applicant did not file a construction mitigation plan, which is required in order to receive a development permit, and they received a development permit. So it's a fact, it happened, everyone knows it happened. So the question is, what rights remain with the community in the absence of complying with the ordinance that you're proposing here?
I mean, one thing that maybe we can offer, Commissioner, is that when the site postings are done, we can have the project planner, physically go and check to make sure that the posting was done as required per the ordinance. We can either, I'm not assuming a code enforcement officer is going to do that, but the project planner can verify. They do that now with verification for some of the postings on site for development permit applications. So it's something that's already part of the planner's process. So they can go and confirm, make sure that that's there. If it's not there, then they can basically make sure that it's that the developer then installs it as quickly as possible.
Well, and/or that should change the 60-day clock, shouldn't it? If the posting is not made, should the 60-day clock be changed?
Commissioner, I think one issue, I think it's obviously a very legitimate concern. I think one issue is the appeal time period, might be set out by state law, and so the city, by adopting this ordinance, is setting parameters around the ministerial approval process and providing extra public notice. But I don't believe the city would have the ability to sort of toll or stay an appeal timeframe that's otherwise required under state law. So I think to Director Contreras' point, there's a possibility to try to enforce these standards, and a ministerial permit is subject to the objective standards in place at the time, the objective development, design, and subdivision standards. So
I guess that's where I'm going here, is I'm trying to understand what those objective standards are. And if one of the standards is you must post, you must notice, and that's when the clock starts ticking, this is your application date, and that's the 60-day clock, and that's part of the standards and that's part of the ordinance. If that's not met, has in fact the application been deemed complete if they haven't done that thing that's part of the application process?
And I know this is the worst lawyerly answer. I think it also depends on the underlying state law in terms of how the project's eligible. So these state laws do say, you know, you can apply development, design, and subdivision objective standards. But for instance, like AB 2011 or some of these state laws may have eligibility criteria about how that project qualifies that may be different or more limited, that doesn't account for a requirement to provide extra notice by the city that's beyond the underlying.
But is noticing addressed in the state law?
No. I can't think of an instance off the top of my head that requires noticing, because a lot of these don't require public hearings for purposes of the underlying, you know, over-the-counter or ministerial approval. So I don't want to say definitively, but I would, not in my knowledge.
I guess, you know, staff has stated in their conclusion that this proposed ETA will result in a transparent and accessible process. And I'm struggling to find the transparency here. I'm finding a lot of opacity. And so
you have a question?
Yes, the question is, what of these things are part of this application process that it deems something, an application complete or isn't complete? We have a checklist, correct?
Correct.
Is the fact that an item is posted part of the checklist?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
The affidavit is like any other exhibit of the application.
Okay, great. That was my question. So then, if they don't do that, but someone did check it off as done, but it's not there, what does that do to this 60-day process? It's something that's happened. So to me, it warrants discussing, given the fact that this is not a transparent process.
My initial thought, Commissioner Hubengartner, is, again, I don't know that it changes the shot clock, so to speak, like the total time in which a ministerial project has to be approved and go through the final approval process. But it does sound like there's the possibility that it might be an appealable, that it might be a question of fact on an appeal.
On an appeal, assuming someone knew the thing happened because there was no posting. Okay, thank you.
If I
Yes,
may,
please.
Chair, I just wanted to pull up one of the state bills that I know we've been discussing, SB 684, just as an example, and just read from the bill's language.
Could you? I couldn't quite hear you.
Sorry, I just wanted to, for purposes of the discussion and the questions, pull up one of the state bills that we've been referencing, in this case SB 684, and what it says specifically about, I think, the type of scenario that Commissioner Hubengartner is describing. So it says, a local agency shall approve or deny an application submitted to a local agency pursuant to this section within 60 days from the date the local agency receives a completed application. If the local agency does not approve or deny a completed application within 60 days, the application shall be deemed approved. If the local agency denies the application, The local agency shall, within 60 days from the date the local agency receives the completed application, return in writing a full set of comments to the applicant with a list of items that are defective or deficient and a description of how the applicant can remedy the application. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate that. I mean, but my point is, there's a checklist, and it's on the application, and you check all of the things, and you say, yes, they did it all. And you proceed with your 60-day window. But it comes to the public's notice that, in fact, one or more of those items was not, in fact, done, such as the noticing. What does that do to the 60-day period? Because staff has checked all the boxes on the list and said, yes, this is complete, but in fact, an objective photograph of the site shows no noticing on the fencing. Then that item, which staff has stated as deemed complete, is not in fact complete. The public has a 60-day window to do their appeal. Is it appealable or not, that objective standard that was checked off as complete that wasn't done?
Yes, I think it's appealable. And also, Commissioner Hoopengardner, I do think even within these ministerial state housing laws, and our director just read into the record sort of the process specific to one, but I think most, if not all, do incorporate the idea that when the application is submitting, the department has the obligation to ensure it meets to the point we're talking about the checklist. So I think there's sort of multiple layers to determine, both, and again, with the caveat that it's contingent on the specific state housing law, but to look at the requirements and the checklist associated with the application, and to the second point that it can be an appealable issue for failure to meet it. And our director just read into the record specific reference to that idea that if the local agency denies the application, so whether it's denied at the department level review, or it goes up on to appeal, that there's an opportunity for the local agency to determine whether or not it was proper to deny, and that obligation for an incomplete checklist is part of that.
Okay, thank
question
you.
of fact.
I appreciate that. One last question. Under review authority, that should be reviewed by the community development director or their designee. How is that determined? Is there a experience level required? Is that designee in any way reviewed by the community director, or is this a single person making all of this decision?
Yep, that's pretty standard language in the code. So it's usually, any planner can issue that decision if designated by the community development director.
Any planner or brand new associate planner,
Senior associate,
anybody can
assistant.
make that decision without supervision.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. They're always supervised by their managers, but
And Commissioner Hoopengardner, I did want to note, once the body takes public comment and moves into deliberation, I did want to note the ZTA, part of the amendments is to Chapter 1950, and that's on demolition permits. And I wanted to note in that instance, there is a reference, at least one reference under 1950-020, as determined by the Director of Community Safety or other designee as designated by the city manager. So I think, it's written so that it's a designee of the Community Development Director, but that's something for the Commission's consideration tonight.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Matos, and then we can follow with Commissioner Gregoire, Vice Chair Gregoire.
Thank you. I just have a couple follow-up questions to Commissioner Hoopengardner's questions. It's my understanding that the state law doesn't even require the local jurisdiction to have a mailer or a posted notice or an appeals process. Is that correct, Isaac? or Michelle?
Correct. I mean, again, I would say it's state law contingent, but to my knowledge, the floor and ceiling of the state law, so sort of the ministerial approval process, I'm not aware of one of these state laws that does require a mailer or notice. The city's doing extra.
So the city is going above and beyond what is required by state law to ensure public transparency in this process, in the ZTA before us.
That is the intent of staff, to try to have an extra level of
Okay, and then I just have a quick follow-up question to that. Given that in the laws that are related to this zone text amendment, we're talking about, let me pull up my notes, AB 2011, we're talking about SB 4, and we're talking about SB 684. These laws, they don't have those requirements for those 3 stopgap measures, right? So first, as outlined in the ZTA, there's a mailer, there's a site posting, and then as proposed by staff, there's an appeal process. Given the regulatory reality that we're in with state laws that have passed, I just had a quick question and follow-up to something that we heard from legal counsel. There would be no way for us to reset a state shot clock at 60 days if objective standards weren't met that weren't required by law. Isn't that correct? So if, for example, an objective appeals process isn't outlined in those bills, and someone appeals based on a notice that wasn't given, would that meet the objective standard outlined by the state law? Does that make sense?
It does, and I know I've had a lot of conditional or caveated answers tonight, but again, I think the goal of the ZTA is try to, as much as possible, create one process right now for all of these state housing laws.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, some of these state housing laws contemplate certain eligibility thresholds that the project has to meet to move forward with the ministerial approval. There's references in some of these state laws, certainly, to objective development design and subdivision standards. So it's going to depend on how the project is submitted in terms of the extent to which an objective criteria associated with notice under our local code is going to apply.
Got it. Yeah, because each of these laws has their own elements to them. For example, AB 2011 creates a CEQA-exempt ministerial entitlement pathway for residential development projects to be located on sites otherwise zoned for commercial use. That's going to have its own set of objective standards versus a different policy that we're considering this evening, SB 4, Affordable Housing on Faith and Higher Education Lands Act. Those policies are not identical, is that correct?
Correct.
So the objective standards would be different for each of them.
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you for waiting patiently. Vice Chair Gregoire, you have questions?
So 60 days. So your recommendation is that the reviewing authority shall be both the Planning Commission and the City Council if need be. Well, if we have to approve or deny something based on objective standards within 60 days, is that possible? Is it possible we can do a ministerial approval, have it appealed to the Planning Commission, and then appealed once again to the City Council within 60 days? I'm confused about that. It seems like there's not enough time for that.
So, echoing what Isaac has said, for a 60-day timeline, historically, that has not happened where 2 appeals has happened in 60 days, but all these state bills have different time to act windows. AB 2011, for example, has 2 60/90-day time to act windows, so there may be an opportunity for appeal process to happen. I think the intent of the zone text amendment is to set the parameters instead of having a one size kind of fit all for all the state bills. So there There could be a project that its time act window does end and we do not get to the appeal and the project is deemed approved, but it's really based on the state bill that's being invoked for that specific project.
Okay, so staff's recommendation contemplates that it's possible we could run out of time depending on the state bill we're trying to comply with.
It's definitely possible.
But the recommendation is based on having a consistent process in various circumstances over the possibility that a party could be denied an appeal because we've run out of time. What sort of burden would it be to have, say, an appeal solely to, say, the city council and to bypass the planning commission? Could we ensure that something could be heard by the city council within 60 days if they were the sole reviewing authority?
Yes, Vice Chair, that would be the intent. Yeah.
So you think, based on the current processes of how this would go, right, if we could get it heard by the city council within 60 days, but being heard by both planning and the city council might not be feasible because that's such a tight.
That is correct. We have to comply with those kind of shot clocks currently, with or without the ZTA, because they are state laws. So what we're trying to do is at least put in a mechanism in order to, to get us with a, desired outcome, whether it is, some additional overview of oversight. That's, staff's recommendation, but, we still have to comply with the state requirements. And I think, there's a couple of avenues to go about that. Either try and, go through the regular appeal process, limited to just city council, or just go with no appeal, which is sort of what's contemplated by the state.
Okay, thank you so much.
Commissioner Solomon?
One final question, and I apologize if it's been answered before, but I think it bears repeating. I mean, the question in front of us tonight is to appeal or not to appeal. Question probably specifically for Isaac, but any staff. The goal of this state legislation by using objective standards is to reduce litigation risk of a project. In your opinion, by implementing an appeals procedure after a staff determination, does that, the fact that a project has had a staff determination and survived the appeals, does that reduce the litigation risk for the project, or are people going to sue because anybody can sue anybody?
Commissioner Solomon, it's a really good question. I would say that having some, for any development project, having some degree of appeal is helpful for the administrative record, in part because the appellant has to specify what they believe was incorrect about the decision that was approved potentially by the director, and that's what would be subject to a future court action. So an appeal provides an opportunity for
it's like
the public and
discovery.
It provides an opportunity for the decision makers and the interested public to zero in on issues associated with the underlying permit, and provides everyone essentially another opportunity to relook at the underlying approval.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Secretary Gillig, are there any public speakers on this item?
Yes, Chair, we do have one. Victor Omachenko, you'll have 3 minutes.
Victor Omachenko, longtime West Hollywood resident. And I think I'm going to do a kind of James Joyce stream of consciousness, because as I sat here, I guess the only member of the public who's commenting, I'm thinking about, well, when would I ever, kind of appeal something? And that's why I like the fact that you've done your due diligence and you've asked questions about the postings and the noticings and making this a truly transparent process. But I do have to say that I'll have to go back and read the staff report more and learn more about this process. This ministerial process to me was always one that was kind of the one that was done over the counter in City Hall with more a streamlined approach and not as heady as the Melrose Triangle or the Weatherly Palms and that. So what's happening is I see that we want to build more housing, we want to streamline the process, but just as a member of the public sitting here listening to your deliberations, I just find it so convoluted and just so, and I've been around the block and I've been here and I've commented over the years and done some appeals too, but all of this just seems like so much stuff, a lot of stuff. And I heard Commissioner Solomon mention that you had looked at this in the long-range subcommittee, and that's good to know. But at the same point, I wonder, like with these state laws that are being numbered, the ones that we hear numbers about, exactly what do we as a city or with this Council of Governments that we're involved in, or with the SCAG that gives us the RENA numbers, what exactly are we doing through our lobbyists to truly streamline the process up in Sacramento and make it less convoluted? Because I would like one day to kind of, I mean, I've heard it over and over, well, we really can't do it or listen to you, public, because it's the state law. We don't have discretion. And as I looked at the chart that Ms. Montenegro had put up, it just seems that there's so little discretion now left on the part of local communities. It seems like stuff is like handed down, and I saw that, oh, the people can talk about design and that, but that also just sounds like it's kind of recommendations. So I sit here and kind of wonder what it is, the impact that we can all have when everything just is sent down to us like the 10 Commandments from Sacramento. So thank you for listening and for letting me to speak.
Thank you, Victor. Chair, that is our last public speaker for this item.
Okay, thank you. Closing the public comment portion of this hearing. And any questions for staff? No. Would anyone like to begin comments for deliberation? Commissioner Jones?
I can start. Yeah, thank you very much. I think everyone else really asked my questions. In reading through this, something kind of caught my attention. It's on page 2, the bottom of page 2, and I'm just going to read this out for ease of reference. It essentially just talks about how the state has introduced notable legislation in recent years to support housing forward objectives, and that these aim to reduce administrative burdens, limit localities' discretion in reviewing and approving housing projects, and generally incentivize by right development with less restrictive development standards. What happens with state law is that a lot of times, whether or not they intend to or not, they make laws and then we are faced with having to write code that we have to implement them, which is very often very, very difficult to do in a way that feels good for us. And I think what I just read means that whether we like it or not, and I think I can speak on behalf of most of us when I say that we don't want there to be less transparency, there is going to be less transparency. So in thinking about all this, and Commissioner Solomon addressed this, the question really becomes, well, if we're not going to have time to run a true appeals process, is it worth having an appeals process at all? And I like that staff is recommending that in the spirit of transparency that we are maintaining an appeals process. I think from a community perspective that would be incredibly frustrating, but I feel like we have to walk a line here. So I think, generally speaking, I'm aligned with staff's recommendation. It doesn't mean that I agree with the way that the laws have been written at the state level. This is why it's so important for all of us to be involved in contacting our elected officials at the, not just the municipal level, but at the state level especially. I say that a lot, but it's true. And I also recognize too, look, there are a lot of bad things happening in our country right now, and that means I think sometimes there's a very low bar for what can be good. I don't want us to lose out on our, or for us to lose sight of our standards and our values. But I think in this case, I am comfortable moving forward with staff's recommendation that we do have an appeal process. I also have some thoughts about ways that we might be able to streamline or make it easier for people to see when something has been posted, but I don't know if that's appropriate for this conversation for our new permitting system, and I can talk about that another time. I'm trying to stay on path here. But those are my thoughts. I'm open to discussion, but I think everyone else asked a lot of really good questions up and down the dais. I feel that they've been answered satisfactorily. Commissioner Hoopengarner asked a lot of great questions about kind of that clock. And again, during her questioning, I was like, well, if I'm a member of the community and there's an appeal that somebody wants, it's almost like, why have an appeal process at all? Because it just feels unfair. But I think, given what we have to work with here, and you asked a lot of important questions, again, I'm comfortable moving this forward as it is currently worded, recognizing that it is inherently fraught given the guardrails in which we have to work. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Commissioner Matos, followed by Commissioner Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. That was very eloquently put, Commissioner Jones. I agree. You know, there's been a lot of changes to state law that have taken away local jurisdictions' ability to make subjective findings in line with the state's housing crisis. We've talked about that a lot, the 4,000 units that were required to meet our RENA goal as a city. It's very important to consider. I think Commissioner Solomon eloquently put it earlier when he says there's a big question here, and that's to appeal or not to appeal. But I first want to just visit the conversation around transparency. While state law does implement changes that do streamline processes and cut red tape, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what I really appreciate about this zone text amendment and the approach that staff has proposed that we take as a city is that despite the fact that state law does not require mailings to the community, state law does not require public site postings for the community to see, state law does not require appeals processes, and other jurisdictions have foregone those measures of transparency to operationalize these changes to state law. As a city, we are taking the approach of doing it anyway. That is, by definition, transparency. I think that that's important. I think that when people see changes in their communities in line with the 3 laws before us, it even says in the resolution that there would be references to the government code that is being applied to that project so that the community is aware what laws apply. I think that is incredibly important. So yes, is there going to be changes that we don't, not everyone agrees with? Yes, there will be, and there has been, and there will continue to be. But the reality is that we have to, as a city, follow state law, whether we like it or not. If you don't like it, call your representatives, call your state legislators, run for state assembly or state senate. But we have to do this. And I think that the city's approach with the ZTA before us is the maximum amount of transparency that could possibly be baked into this process. And we're doing things that state law are not requiring us to do, and other cities are not doing. So I just want to throw that out there for whatever it's worth. When we talk about an appeals process, we have to, in my opinion, we have to take a supremely balanced approach. Because the reality is if someone puts forward a flawed proposal on the objective standards, because remember, state law says it has to be an objective standard, and each of these laws apply to specific types of projects. It's not just blanket projects across the board. AB 2011 is conversion of residential development in areas principally zoned for commercial use. They talk about SB4. This is specific for 100% affordable housing being proposed on land of an institution of higher education or religion. The list goes on and on here, but the point being that when we talk about an appeal, with many of these laws, we are going to have to balance our need to find any mistakes or address concerns of the communities when it comes into terms with objective standards, while also realizing that if we take too long, regardless of anything, black and white, state law, the project is going to be approved. So I think that as a city, we need to take an approach that sets us up for success in that regard, that is actually achievable. I personally don't think that a two-pronged appeals process is even feasible. We've seen how long it takes to get things on the agenda to this body, and then the lag time for an appeal. And then it goes to city council, how long it takes to agendize with city council. And then so on and so forth. I think that would be setting us up for failure in an environment that is heavily regulated by state law. I do think that an appeal is still important. I do, because it gives the community members the right to look at objective standards, because again, you can't just appeal on any given basis. You have to appeal on the objective standards before you. I think that personally, if I were to make a decision tonight, and I'd welcome open discussion with the body, is looking at alternative one, which is an appeal to the city council, because that allows us as a city to take a public hearing and still have that transparency that we've seen throughout this zone text amendment, by the way, while also weighing the fact that if we set ourselves up for a two-pronged appeals process and we don't meet 60 days, whether we like it or not, flawed or not, as proposed, the project is approved. So I think that we need to take a balanced approach here and have that discussion in a really meaningful way. But at the end of the day, overall, I think that these policies are well-intentioned. They're looking to create more housing opportunities in our community. So I just wanted to put that out there for whatever it's worth. Very supportive of the public noticing. I think that is an important measure of transparency, but when it comes to the recommendations before us on the appeals, I think that we need to set ourselves up for success and move towards alternative one, which is an appeal process to the city council, which allows community members to see it play out in a public process while also realizing that we are subject to the 60-day shot clock. I'll conclude my comments there. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Commissioner Solomon.
Thank you, and thank you for the comments before me. I am obviously in favor of a ministerial housing permit process, not only because I'm personally in favor, but because state law says we have to do it. So I'm in favor of a permit process. The question that we're all wrangling with is the appeals process. When it was at long-range planning, we all in the room and staff were opposed to any sort of appeals process because of wanting to implement a streamlined process in line with state law. But however, and I'll hang on sort of the last question that I asked to you, Isaac, is does an appeals process help a project get built under AB 2011 or SB 684 because it decreases litigation risk? And if you're telling me that the answer is yes, because it adds more to the administrative record that would ultimately go to a court of law, then I am in favor of an appeals process. But in the last 12 to 18 months, there's been, off the top of my head, there's been 3 decisions by the Planning Commission that have been appealed to the City Council. 910 Weatherly, the Bank of America building on Santa Monica Boulevard, I can't remember the address, and the Viper Room. All 3 of those, decision from the Planning Commission. Well, the Viper Room had a DA on it. I don't know if that was an appeal. But all 3 of those, a decision from the Planning Commission and then an appeal to the City Council. In those instances, it feels like it took, at least 2 to 3 months in each of them. I think that we're setting ourselves up for disaster with a self-imposed deadline of 2 bites at the apple, an appeal to planning, an appeal to city council. It's like when you tell your boss, like, I'll get that to you by the end of the day, but that wasn't the right thing to say because you're not going to get that document to them by the end of the day. I think that we're setting ourselves up for failure by saying you can have 2 different prongs for the appeal. And I think that it probably even hurts the administrative record if, let's say we go through this process and the appellant only appeals to the Planning Commission, the appeal is denied, and then they're in the process of appealing to the City Council, but the shot clock runs out, so the project is deemed approved, and then at court they can say, well, I didn't really get my fair due process. The city didn't even abide by their own zoning ordinance when it came to my appeal. So I am in favor of alternative 1, which is 1 appeal, an appeal to the City Council, 60 days to do that after a project determination and after the 10-day window is open for someone to make the appeal. I think that is a much more realistic timeline for what we've seen lately on what it is that we're able to accomplish with agendas and preparing materials and preparing our electeds to be able to make a decision. So yes, I'm in favor of this CTA, and my push would be for alternative 1 appeal to the council.
Thank you. Commissioner Hoopengarner?
Yes, I would agree with Commissioner Jones. I think, yes, we need to approve this. State law is state law. We got to do what we got to do. But I think we need to do it our way. And we need to do it with as much transparency as possible, given the restrictions. Now, the 60-day window, and I understand my colleagues' arguments about how difficult this may or may not be. But first of all, we've never actually tried to do it, okay? Second of all, we've had a lot of open space on our agendas because of a lot of changes. And so I don't see that that's really a limit. We've had meetings canceled. I don't see that there would be any inability to put this on our agendas. It's not been, well, we've never tested it, so it's not proven. The other thing is, to Commissioner Solomon's point about the 2 appeals that did happen, those weren't based on objective standards. And those delays were largely based upon things such as waiting on transcripts of the prior hearing. And those were driven by other constraints that had nothing to do with what would happen in this scenario, because there wouldn't be a transcript, there wouldn't be any of those constraints in an appeal under this ZTO, this ordinance. We have a track record of providing affordable housing. We are not the bottleneck in this state. We have never been, and we have been the leader. We have been named, I forget our designation as the pro-housing. We are not the bottleneck, and our staff is not the bottleneck. And if you look at things like Melrose Triangle, and you can argue, oh, well, that took so long. Well, the reason it took so long is because the applicant changed their project over and over and over again. Look at Robertson Lane. Applicant is changing their project over and over and over again. That's not staff. That's not us. We are not the bottlenecks. So to strip transparency away from the community and to strip any rights of appeal away from the community, I feel would be the absolute wrong way to go. And I would 100% support staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Commissioner Carvalero?
Yeah, I won't repeat any of the comments made. They're all really great comments. We're all trying to put on a very uncomfortable shoe right now. When I finished reading the staff report, I thought alternative 1 was the only one that seemed reasonable to me. I don't see why it needs to come back to Planning Commission. I think having it reviewed by City Council is something that seems feasible given what I see or how I see things move through the city. Yeah, I'm in support of having that alternative one implemented.
Commissioner, oh, okay, Vice Chair Gregoire.
I'm agreeing with Commissioners Mato, Solomon, and Caballero. I support alternative one as well. My concern about, look, I don't think it's ideal that we would have appeals only before the City Council, but given the practical reality of a state law that limits the process to 60 days, it seems to me that's really the only reasonable alternative here. Can you imagine how people will feel if there's a ministerial decision and it comes to the Planning Commission makes a ruling, and they want to appeal it to the elected leaders of our community, and they can't because the 60 days have expired. So it just seems to me that it will leave a really bad taste in the community's mouth if they're told they can't appeal to the City Council because the 60 days have run. So if we do want to assure that there is a real appeal, that they're going to be able to have their elected leaders make the final decision on the project, it seems like we really have to go with alternative one. You know, staff's recommendation today means there are circumstances when time is going to run out. And again, I don't think the community will feel good about that. So I do support my fellow commissioners that are advocating for alternative one.
Thank you. Commissioner Jones, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I have just a thought. So I actually am open to alternative one. And again, I think I don't want to completely override our process in the city, but I also just want to call out, one, I think overwhelmingly, most of the time, planning commission decisions are upheld by council. Maybe am I having a short memory here, but I feel like usually they are. Maybe not unanimously, but they generally are. One thought I had, and I think I know what legal will say to this, but this is just a thought. If we're so for people who aren't aware, Planning Commission meets the first and third Thursday of every month, and council meets the first and third Monday of every month. Is that right? Is that right? I see some head nodding. Okay. So in the interest of, again, I think I know the answer. Isaac, you can check me here. What if it was the meeting that was closest, like the first available meeting, like closest to the appeal, whether it was the Planning Commission or City Council?
Commissioner Jones, I think one difficulty with that would be that the Planning Commission, under our general appeal guidelines, the Planning Commission decision is then still appealable.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. I'm just trying to think about ways to make it faster. You know, when we do see these appeals for these projects, you know, these are lots of people come to meetings. It takes a lot of effort on behalf of the community. It's a big deal. It also takes up a lot of time at meetings. So again, I don't want to subvert our own process, but thinking about, you know, ways that we can maintain some vestige of a public process, which again, it sounds like we have the option not to, and I don't feel comfortable doing that. I do think alternative one is, I can get behind that. I'm open to that. I mean, it also means loss of Planning Commission oversight, and that's highlighted in kind of the drawback column, and I recognize that, but in the interest of the public having kind of that route to council, and that's the final decision, I'm okay with that. I can get behind that.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone's really thoughtful questions and deliberation, which has made it pretty easy for me, other than trying to navigate these screens here and who's asking for what right now. I actually share a lot of sentiment with Commissioner Jones, and you really summarized where I was standing on things. I do feel like I have a quick question for staff to reconfirm. So it seemed, and I will be the first to say I'm not an expert in these types of matters. It's a little bit less my strength, but it seemed like the scenario where the time clock would be 60 days may be very rare and a double appeal. So perhaps that's why staff is recommending process as it's set up now. But now that we've had this discussion, I am on the fence and trying to understand this, and I'm just curious what does this really mean? Like, are we boxing ourselves in, or are you confident with the recommendation as you have it? Like, can you help me understand what this means if we go with alternative 1 versus if we were to say, no, it should be first brought to the Planning Commission and then the City Council if it were to be appealed again? It could be a question for legal or for, yeah.
Yeah. No, Chair, I think, you know, as you mentioned, like this is very, it is very complex to bring forth the, you know, state requirements and try and sort of meld them and combine them with our code and based on our, you know, local context. And, you know, we did provide alternatives for the Planning Commission to consider. You know, usually we don't. And sometimes we add those additional alternatives for consideration because we want the Planning Commission to, you know, give some thought to some other ways that this could potentially, you know, be developed. So, you know, we're comfortable with, you know, either of the alternatives, and which is one of the reasons why we posted them on the agenda. So we're confident that either one will be able to operationalize and institute and implement.
Okay, thank you. So I understand the housing needs that exist, and I'm 100% for housing and streamlining it as much as we can. And I think that our city has done an amazing job at trying to navigate all of the state laws that exist and still trying to allow for some process to happen and for it to happen publicly as much as possible. And we've watched it change over the years, and this is, you know, where we are again looking at that. So I think it's a hard one for me. I mean, I'm kind of on the fence right now the more I think about it. I do not necessarily like the idea of defaulting to saying that we here wouldn't be reviewing items, but I also do worry about a scenario where we've created more headache because something times out and then defaults to move forward and requires some other sort of legal procedure by whoever is at that point.
Well, the question kind of becomes, if I may,
Mm-hmm.
you know, adhering to the process or there being a process at all,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's about our ability to meet the moment with this the process that's been kind of delineated to us. Other jurisdictions aren't even doing this.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it sounds like none of us feel comfortable with that. Like not having an appeal. I know I don't.
Yeah. No, I'm in support of alternative 1.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. So, I mean, do we want to see where consensus is on alternative 1 now, or does anyone want to speak further?
I can make a motion.
I can get behind alternative 1. I don't love it because I feel like the reason we exist is to vet things for council and to shake them down and to get them to a place where council can make a quick decision. And my concern about taking things straight to council is that they have a tendency to maybe get short shrift because there is so much on their agenda. And that's why we exist. So that is why I have supported staff's suggestion, because we have the time to deliberate things more thoroughly and effectively. I do think that we can do it in 60 days. Again, we have time on our agenda. It's not like I mean, how many times have we been out of here in 30 minutes lately? I mean, we have plenty of time on our agenda. That's the reason I've supported staff's recommendation. I'm concerned, and I get behind the 60-day window and, you know, only one appeal. I understand that as well. So if push comes to shove, I could support it. But again, I'm concerned that if it goes to council, it could get short shrift because they just don't have the time and the bandwidth to absorb it. And that would be my concern with only one review body.
I understand that concern, but I would just offer, for whatever it's worth, these are the elected representatives of the people. And I think that they would put due diligence. I have faith in our city council that they would put due diligence in investigating the full facts before them and the objective standards before them and making a determination that plays out in a public hearing. I think that it assures transparency while also being mindful of our ability to meet the standard and mindful of the community's time, given the really, really narrow scope and lens that we can look at these projects to put it to the city council. Like I said, if we get, for any reason, honestly, I can't recall a time when we had a meeting that was under an hour and a half. Personally, I like to take notes of how long our meetings typically last. But I just don't see a world where there's a service to the community if we don't meet the 60-day shot clock and then there's no consideration for any findings. That, I think, is a disservice to the community, and that's why, while I would love to say, let's go with the current process, this is a very unique circumstance, and there are extraordinary situations that are worthy of further consideration. So that's why I'm thinking, I think, at the end of the day, this is the city council's determination. We're making a recommendation, but I think that just given the reality and the nuance of this law, I really do think alternative one is the way to go.
Okay, thank you. And I think Commissioner Carvalero would like to say something.
Yeah, I mean, for me, why is it that I feel like we're setting ourselves up for failure if we have Planning Commission and council reviewing? That gives the public, they have to appeal twice, and it just doesn't seem feasible to be able to do that within 60 days. I mean, the community has to see the posting, then they have to respond. Staff has to set up a staff report, send it over to us. I mean, that alone could take 3 weeks. And then we hear it, we move it forward, and the whole thing starts over again. It just seems not feasible to me. And just in regards to the noticing, because I've noticed for clients a lot, and staff always requires that I send a photograph of the posting to them immediately after, or it doesn't log on. So I'm not sure what happened with the situation the example that you brought up, but it's not like they checked the box. I just feel like it's not like staff just checks the box without verifying. I've been verified every single time. So I think staff is doing what they need to do to make sure that that's happening.
Okay, thank you. And I see if my screen's accurate, and I know you mentioned it earlier that Commissioner Matos, you may have a motion.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion if I may, Chair. My motion is to move the zone text amendment with the recommendation regarding appeals in line with alternative one for a process that delineates a single appeal to the City Council.
I'll second.
Does your motion include all of the changes read into the record by Ms. Montenegro?
Yes, it also includes the changes recommended by staff.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion, and it's seconded by Commissioner Carvalero.
Chair, before we vote, Long Range does have some suggested language, so because it's a zone text amendment, we'd want to ensure our motion maker and second are comfortable with the proposed language for alternative one.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So we will be modifying section 19.76.020 titled Allowed Appeals. It's a or A.1, so A1, Community Development Director decisions. Any decision on a discretionary permit rendered by the Community Development Director may be appealed to the Planning Commission, except that a decision regarding an adult business, insert new text, or a ministerial housing permit eligible under Chapter 19.43, end of new text, shall be appealed directly to the Council. Any decision by the Community Development Director on ministerial permit, insert new text, that does not qualify as a ministerial housing permit eligible under Chapter 19.43, end of new text, parentheses, for example, zone clearances, sign permits, etc., may be appealed to the Planning Commission, provided that the only allowed grounds for appeal shall be that the Community Development Director's decision has not complied with the applicable provisions of the zoning ordinance. So we're just adding that particular section.
And is the motion, is there more? Yes.
And apologies, Chair. So what Director Contreras just read into the record, so that would change our existing provision on appeals, 19.76020, and I believe we actually have a recommended change as well to 1943, the ZTA in front of you, that would also effectuate that same intent.
Okay. Yep, and that is section 9.3.070. A, appeals. The director's decision on a ministerial housing permit may be appealed to the City Council, provided that the only allowed grounds for appeal shall be that the director's decision has not complied with the applicable provisions of the zoning ordinance or the eligibility of the ministerial housing permit under its governing government code section. Any filed appeal must comply with the requirements of section 19.76.030, filings and processings of appeals.
So to the motion maker in the second, we would just ask first to the motion maker and then the second verbal confirmation that the motion include those changes that Director Contreras just read to section 19.43070, and in addition to 19.76020, that's language existing within our code on appeals, to effectuate that a ministerial housing permit under this new chapter 19.43 would be appealed to the City Council, in addition to the clarification edits that Ms. Montenegro read into the record.
Yes. Concurrence.
I agree.
Okay, thank you.
And the motion passes unanimously, approving resolution number PC 24-1598 as amended. There is no appeal process. This is a recommendation going forward to the City Council.
Thank you. And we are 2.5 hours into this meeting. Is there interest in a break before we continue on? Does staff have an estimate on how long the presentation will be?
Presentation should take about 3 minutes.
Okay. Do we want to march along? I'm okay with that if everyone else is. Okay, great. So item 11A, this is new business, zoning improvement program for housing, or ZIP, as we heard earlier from our community development director.
Thank you, Chair. And we will remain in our seats, and Michelle Montenegro will provide you with the presentation.
Hello again. I'll be presenting an item on the zoning improvement program for housing, also known as ZIP. So I'll be going through a housing element overview, RENA progress, which you've seen before, program overview, the outreach timeline, and some analysis. So the housing element for the City of West Hollywood, which was adopted and certified in 2023, has 31 programs and 160 objectives. The ZIP program in front of you responds to approximately 18 objectives of the 116, which is about 15% of the housing element. So the housing element programs are specifically being addressed are 11, 17, and 20. There was one objective that states the monitor of the progress in meeting all income categories of RENA in 2024. And if the city is not projected to be on track, that we look at additional strategies. So as we see that in the previous, I'm going to take a moment here to address some housing element tools that are available to the public. So one is our platform for the housing element that addresses policies and programs. Another is our RENA dashboard. So we show our RENA progress, presenting that we are not in progress to meet our RENA goals by 2029. We currently have 484 permitted units, and if we were to forecast out, again, we will only be above 1,000 units. This is RENA progress by affordability. So we are under on all the categories, including above moderate, moderate, and lower income, which includes low and very low. So ZIP overview, the zoning improvement program primarily addresses 3 objectives, which are derived from language in the housing element to reduce zoning-related hurdles, introduce a base and bonus system that is modernizing our incentive overlays, such as the MUIO, and then creating a transit-oriented development program. So to the right are guiding principles that we are using to present to the community and surround our analysis and recommendations around. There are concurrent planning initiatives currently happening that will be integrated into the larger ZIP. So one includes our inclusionary housing study, which includes an alignment with state density bonus law. Another is our mixed use policies, and objective development standards was studied and will be integrated into ZIP as well. So there's 3 primary phases of the program. The first is baseline analysis, second is alternatives analysis, and third is recommendations. We're wrapping up our baseline analysis with the engagement that we're doing in March, and then we'll follow with alternatives analysis. At the end of that stage, the item will be presented once again to Planning Commission. So these are some examples of the analysis that we've done so far. This is a residential visualization of the landscape that happens within the city, so we can see where low density as well as higher density land uses exist. Another analysis that we've done is analysis of our incentive utilization. So we can see that there's a number of projects that have utilized incentives. And then if we continue on, we're also looking at lot typologies within the city as a function of what type of housing typologies can be produced. So there's another narrow example of that. So our outreach strategy includes various activities. So we start with a community workshop that is on March 5th. There is also an online webinar on March 11th, and we have other activities going on, such as developer roundtables, focus groups, to targeted outreach. So we are partially funded by a Metro grant. So this does require targeted outreach towards underrepresented communities, which we will be doing by targeting social service providers and their networks. We'll also be touching upon nonprofit organizations and connecting with those networks to further outreach with those communities. And this is a larger timeline. We launched the program really in the end of last year, but we presented to City Council in February. So we're in our first community outreach phase, and there'll be a second larger one in the summer. And that concludes our presentation. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Commissioner Solomon?
On that schedule that you threw up right at the end, does it differ from our attachment? Does this come before long-range planning?
We've done a recent change. It will not come before long-range planning, but instead we're expanding it to have a working session in August with the full Planning Commission.
Okay. Second question I had relates to the staff report, and I figure we're going to have a lot of time to discuss this, so I'm not going to belabor much, but on the staff report on page 9 of 13 on figure 4, I'm trying to figure out what these circles mean. One, I think it's great that you have as an overlay future proposed Metro K-line stations on there. I mean, that's what we need to be thinking about. But it seems like there's 2 circles around each proposed site. One that is color-coded by the zoning of each parcel around it, and then kind of a longer dotted line. What's the shorter circle? What's the bigger circle?
Yeah, so the smaller circle is a 5-minute walk shed, and the larger circle is a 10-minute walk shed from a major transit stop or the proposed K-line station.
Okay, the caption says land uses within a half-mile proposed stations, which is kind of the metric I'm used to thinking of in my head when it comes to AB 2097. Mm-hmm. So is it a half mile or is it 10-minute walk?
That would require a correction. It's a 10-minute walk is the larger dotted line,
Okay.
not a half mile.
That's it. That's all my questions. Thanks.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you. And we're good to go because this was approved as part of the agenda. And reminder, we did skip through item 10D because that's continued to a date uncertain as well. So if we're all good there, then item 12, unfinished business, there are none. And excluded consent calendar, we have none. So items from staff, planning manager's update.
Thank you, Chair. Just a review of upcoming Planning Commission meetings and other subcommittee meetings. 4 days from today, as you all know, we're going to be doing the joint study of the City Council and the Planning Commission with regards to development agreements and public benefit policy discussion. On March 6th, we do have at least 4 items on the agenda. We have the proposal for a nightclub at 8945 Santa Monica Boulevard. We are bringing back the ZTA for the expanded noticing and engagement for development agreements. There's also a discussion or more of a public comment period for the 1000 North La Brea Avenue draft EIR. So that's sort of an opportunity for the Planning Commission to provide their comments on the draft EIR. So that has been set aside for March 6th. And then there is sort of a routine update. This is probably a 6-month update for Total Wines and More over at 1130 North La Brea. And then for the March 20th meeting, there are 2 ZTAs currently on the docket. We have ZTA for the EV charging stations that's coming back to the Planning Commission, as well as the ZTA for accessory business use enhancements that we're doing, sort of a little bit in partnership with our Chamber of Commerce and their small business initiative. And then for long-range planning subcommittee, there are no items currently for the March agenda, and the April agenda is canceled due to Passover. So, design review subcommittee. We have an item on March 13th that is a mixed-use commercial building at 401 North Robertson. Nothing else on the other agendas. And then lastly, for SASE, on February 27th, there is a review of 8439 Sunset Boulevard. This is a billboard at Piazza del Sol. And then in March, at the March 27th SASE meeting, there is a billboard at 8760 Sunset Boulevard. And with that, Chair, that concludes Planning Manager's comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions or notes from my colleagues? No? Okay. That brings us to item 15, public comment.
Yes, Chair. If we could back up to the zone text, we missed the public comment. And we do have a couple people that wanted to speak.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Is Zaya here? Okay. Zaya, you have 3 minutes. Come on up. You have state your name and city of residence, please. You'll be followed by Victor Omochenko. Thank you, Chair.
Good evening. Zia Berker, City of West Hollywood. It's actually my second time in this chamber. First time as a speaker. The last time I was here was February 1st, 2018 for a 5-unit townhome project that I got approval from Commissioner Huppengarner, Commissioner Jones, and Commissioner Carvejo back in the day. I've completed it. It was my first project. It was definitely an adventure. And along the way, I learned a lot that people like us, meaning like small developers that develop single lot properties instead of the larger properties that are backed by larger companies, need more assistance when it comes to the development. So I wanted to talk about in support of the ZIP program and specifically thank Associate Planner Montenegro for assisting me, helping me out with getting more informed about the program. That's basically about it. I just wanted to come here in support of the program since usually the speakers are here in opposition to it. I thought it would be a change of pace to come and support something. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Viktor Omachenko?
Hello again, Viktor Omulchenko, longtime West Hollywood resident. So I just wanted to clarify, and by saying it, maybe I'll understand it better. Our RENA numbers that we get, that's what our staff in the community worked very hard to establish and to identify where we can possibly have and build 4,000 or so new housing units. That is a goal. That is an aspirational goal, and I see us on our way to meeting that, maybe not as quickly as we want to. I guess I heard the number something like 500 or so, but I just have this feeling that everybody's saying that those 4,000 units must be built and people must be in them by the year 2019, and it must be done. Is that true, or is that a RENA myth? I think we are doing a good job getting towards our goal. Maybe at another meeting, we can see how other cities in our vicinity are getting to their goals. But the feeling I get is there's a lot of pressure on you to get 4,000 holes dug in the ground and produce these 4,000 units, but that's a long-term goal, and it's not as if you have to kill yourself to get all of them in, because listen, you just approved the removal of one housing unit earlier tonight. Housing crisis here, housing crisis there. So I just wanted to bring that up. So the other thing is about this housing, the ZIP improvement program. Commissioner Solomon raised the question that I had down here, and that's why I wanted to speak on this. I would think that things like this ZIP program would have been brought to your long-range planning subcommittee. I'm one member of the public here. Where's the outreach? I've barely heard anything about this. What's happening on March 5th? Where on March 5th is this happening? Is there a consultant doing all this outreach? What's happening with the March 11th Zoom meeting? I feel we need a little bit more outreach, because if we want to zip through this program and zip through inventory overlays and create all these new zippy things, I really think we should have more people involved. Where are they? Where are your friends who are interested in ZIP and housing? Why aren't there more people? I'm not trying to say, oh, Victor's here, but why aren't there more people concerned about this other than you? And now, hopefully, some of my neighbors will show up at these rather unpublicized meetings.
Thank you. That's our last public speaker.
Okay, thank you, and my apologies for rushing ahead. I should not have done that. We are now at public comment again, so any general public comments at this time? No? Okay. Then item 16, items from commissioners. Okay, Commissioner Jones.
Chair Lombardi, I'm sorry. I think there was some confusion. I see our public commenter speaking. I did want to note the ZIP item wasn't a public hearing item, so that was covered during general public comment. So I would say, to the extent we have a speaker who wants to speak again, I would say it's up to the chair's discretion on that.
I just heard there was no one that wants to speak again, but if someone wants to speak again, I'm all for an opportunity to speak, yeah, so why not?
Only if he sings.
Anything.
Only if you sing.
Sing. Sing for us, Victor.
Just 3 minutes. This is the other thing I had wanted to talk about. Victor Omolchenko, longtime West Hollywood resident. Folks, you all know about the big Lake West Hollywood hole in the ground that the City Council just discussed filling the swamp. The swamp where, as I ride by on my bicycle, I often hear all that rushing water, all that water running down to who knows where. But the issue has come up, and it's appeared today in the Beverly Press on the front page. And I feel that our electeds, especially Mayor Byers and Councilmember Heilman, had some good comments. And I just wanted to share with you that what they said was Councilmember Heilman thought, gee, maybe we should have looked and thought more about having real estate people kind of look at this, and then Mayor Byers mentioned that, oh, hopefully something will happen and that we'll get people who are really committed, so that for the public, this is what we were all regaled with and what we were all promised over the years. I know that some of you were maybe involved with the Melrose Triangle project, but what I have to say as a member of the West Hollywood Preservation Alliance is that we tried to work with the city and the developer to incorporate into that project a historic, streamlined, modern building, the Jones Dog and Cat Hospital, which was ultimately demolished, never to return. It didn't happen. So the preservation community kind of has gotten kind of over it, but just wishes that before you and others approve gigantic projects like this, you give some consideration for historic preservation, and that you ask the developer, do you got enough money to construct the big project? So here we are now with a big hole in the ground, 80 units of housing, 24 of which were going to be low and moderate income housing, and the rest market rate. They're not going to be built because the area is going to be backfilled. So, do we have to adjust our arena numbers? Has that been accounted for and credited somewhere? That we were all expecting the developer, who the principal is now in federal prison for bribing officials in the city of Hawthorne, not here. So my last point to make is, and I thank Community Development Director Nick Marisich for providing the City Council with that update on major development projects. Let's see who we get into bed with in the future in terms of developers who promise the world and we get left with a swamp. Because I understand that the Charles Company that was behind this now ill-fated company, or this ill-fated Melrose Triangle project, is in line for another big project on Sunset Boulevard, which involves a historic building, and that's across the street from the Roxy. It's supposed to be some kind of a hotel. So I think you have the discretion when developers come up to you to ask, do we want to get into business with you because you didn't work out with this gigantic hole in the ground? And I just needed to vent on that and just say that how this came to pass, I know it went through litigation and everything, but the fact that we're left with this big hole in the ground and everything was so front-loaded, and now to get it approved, and now we're finding out 27,000 trucks of dirt is supposed to be brought back in, and there's major concern in the community that if we did all of these environmental impact reports prior to approving this project, then maybe we have to be very, very careful with what we bring back in to that big hole in the ground, because I know that Calabasas doesn't want the dirt from Pacific Palisades, and I don't want any poisoned dirt coming back into our city thanks to the Arbin Gabay Charles Company. Bad, actors. Thank you for the extended time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, any more public commenters? No? Okay, item 16, items from commissioners. I heard Commissioner Jones would like to speak.
Yes, thank you to anybody who's still here, first of all. And second of all, I just wanted to make a suggestion. When I was chair, I've been chair, I believe, twice now. I didn't have the ability to look at the screen when I'm trying to run a meeting. And I don't want to speak for Chair Lombardi, but I just think for the benefit of everybody up and down the dais and the public, because they can't see when somebody requests to make a motion, that we just verbally signal when we want to make a motion. It's clear that our screens are like not matching up, and in the spirit of transparency, which has been a real through line in tonight's meeting, I just wonder if it's not helpful for someone to say, Chair, I'd like to make a motion. It just seems like a best practice to me. That would be Merrick, unless we can have something whereby, you know, these screens, I don't know when this lag started. I want to say by maybe about a year ago, but there's a lag on these screens, and it is tangible. And people in the audience and on Zoom cannot see what we see on our screens. It's nothing special, just there's nothing that it's nothing private. It's just I would just like it to be, you know, I don't want people to feel like feelings to be hurt if they press a button and someone's not looking at the right screen. I also realize there's an agenda button on here which shows a different view and can show a speaker that if I'm not on that screen, I don't see that. So that is my comment. That's it. I just wanted to say that just to alleviate any frustration anybody might have about not being heard. Someone just can say, like, I have a motion. I just think that would be best for everyone up here.
Agreed. Completely agreed. And at the moment, the pressing of the screen for the motion is mostly helpful for bringing it to the vote. So that's the one obstacle, and hopefully things will get improved.
It also shows on the screen, just for whatever it's worth.
What? Sorry?
The big screen, whenever you hit the button and you make a motion, it shows up on the big screen too.
Well, it doesn't show up on my screen. I mean, sometimes it does, but okay, Commissioner Solomon.
Just one comment, and I didn't realize that item 11A would move so quickly, but just catching that the ZIP program is not coming to long-range planning anymore, just kind of as an aside at the end. I'd like to urge staff that it should come. I'm just a member of the subcommittee, not the chair or vice chair of it, but I do feel like there isn't anything more long-range planning than a zoning improvement program. So I enjoy the conversations that we have in that subcommittee where we get to kind of dig in a lot on the item. So I hope that you'll reconsider and go back to the previous recommendation of bringing that program to LRP before it comes to the full body.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. All right. Well, I do have a couple of things. So first of all, I really want to appreciate public's participation today. I found it very enjoyable, and thanks for handling me bumping along between what's on screen and also trying to keep this very lengthy agenda moving. And also thank you for all my colleagues for helping me while this screen was not always working. Into more serious things. So I'm just going to say, like, very simply, regarding the continuation of item 8A today, because I want to ensure that I can preserve participation should there be an appeal. I'm not saying anything. And so if that wasn't clear for some of the public, because there was a lot that was brought up by legal, that's why you're probably not hearing much here today. And then also, one last thing, I know that there's been a lot of interest in the ZIP program and understanding what is moving forward, so I presume staff will continue to send out some e-blasts and notices, but it sounds like the more you can do, and the more clarity that's provided, that would be appreciated, since this is still early on in the process. And that's all. Thank you. Unless there's anything else? No? Okay. Well, then it is 9:27, and I will adjourn this meeting. And the next regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting will be, hold on. Thank you. Thursday, March 6th, since my calendar's not coming up. Thursday, March 6th, 6:30 p.m. here at Council Chambers. And
the joint study session.
And yes, thank you. Additionally, on this coming Monday, I can't see my calendar right now. Thank you. February 24th at 6 p.m., so half an hour earlier than when we usually meet, there will be a joint study session with City Council, which I think will be really appreciated and bring some clarity to some of the process that we do here between both of those bodies. So please listen in if you can. Thank you.
The only reason why I do this work is so that people feel like they are seen, and then also that I remain to be seen.